my eye. But that is completely irrelevant to this video. It feels like an eyelash. Hey guys, welcome to today's video. Welcome back as well to the exam secret series that I started in summer and kind of gave you a taster of. I didn't forget about it, I just did one episode, shall we say, and didn't do any more. So yeah, this is going to be episode 2. The focus of this whole series in general is to give you my advice regarding studying, taking exams, hence exam secrets, but you know, everything to do with my study advice condensed in this one place. And it also will be the basis of my ebook or the book thing that I am wanting to do at some point. This is obviously just my advice from personal experience. And so yeah, this one, as I said, is about my dissertation. I was a science student, so I obviously wrote a science dissertation, and it combined oncology, cancer with immunology, which was a field that I loved and found super interesting. I'm hoping this might be applicable and will be applicable, well, some of the points anyway, to those of you doing arts and humanities subjects, as well as if you're doing a science subject obviously, but also not only dissertations but like literature reviews or research projects. But yeah, my dissertation, where is it? Where is my dissertation? Is it over here? This is the dissertation folder. I think we had to submit 2 bound copies, so I don't actually think I have a final thing. That's sad. I didn't even buy one for myself. I thought I did that though. This is not my final version. This is one that I obviously printed and went through and proofread, etc., modified. But yeah, this is my dissertation anyway. A bit of background to my dissertation. It had to be 6,000 words, which is actually on the shorter side. I think the average length for a dissertation is normally about 10,000. So yeah, 6,000 words was not a lot to play with, if I'm completely honest with you. It formed 20% of my whole entire grade. Why did I choose to wear the hot pink sports bra today? Anyway, so I went into my final exams knowing that I'd already done 20%. In some ways that was quite reassuring. However, because I had no clue how good my dissertation was, it was a bit like, well, you know, I've just still got to do everything I can for these exams. I was assigned a supervisor who was a specialist in that field. He'd actually discovered something super important that I was studying, and it was just a bit like, wow. Yeah, I had 4 supervisions with my supervisor, and I chose a title from a list, even though we could have made our own. Oh, I also did it instead of doing a research project in the lab. It just suited me a lot better. If you watched my live reaction to my results, you already know, but I got a first in my dissertation, and my percentage was 85%. In the UK, the grading system at university is over 70% as a first, and I don't know how true this is, but we are told that over 80% is publishable. I don't know if that's true. I was just really happy with the fact that I got a first and a pretty good like score. So yeah, that's my dissertation. Hello emails. So yeah, now onto my dissertation story, or everything I basically did. I want to make this as comprehensive and detailed as possible. Where shall we begin? I have my notes here so I don't forget anything to tell you. Okay, I know where we start. We start with the title. Even though it sounds a bit trivial, picking the right title can really make a difference. We were given a list, we could have made our own, but I read through the titles we were given. A couple of them stood out to me and interested me immediately, so what I did was, because I couldn't decide at the start and I'm very indecisive as a person, I picked 2 titles and did a bit of research, looked into the topic a little bit to see if I could get a feel for them both, and then I made my decision. So yeah, I would say when picking a title, either make one up or pick one that interests you in a field that you feel as if you can enjoy writing about. And don't be afraid if the title immediately sounds a bit confusing or is worded in a strange way, because once you get into doing the research, you will eventually get a feel for it. And as I said, you can always modify your title if you're going down a different route or you need to narrow it. But having said that, you do kind of want to know what the title is vaguely about, otherwise you will have big problems trying to write a lot about it, if you see what I mean. By the end of it, the goal anyway is to become an expert in that field, for you to know a lot about the literature and what's out there currently. The next thing is research phase. So I think research is so important. If you put a lot of effort into doing your research, when you eventually come to write it.
Okay,
what?
I found this on the web for his research phase, so important if you put a lot of effort into doing. Check it out.
Why does Siri do this to me? I don't even say hey Siri and it starts to do this. So yeah, research phase. Put a lot of effort into research and then writing it won't be too difficult. It should flow nicely. I would suggest start early. There are kind of two ways in which I found papers. One of them worked a lot better for me and that's the one I'm going to focus on. One sec. Yeah, my supervisor suggested that I firstly looked at review papers, and in science those are the ones that summarize information and give you a good background. So I read a lot of review papers that were centered around my topic, and then I did further research by going to the primary papers that were linked within the reviews, and in that way I was finding the most relevant papers, and I was also trying to make sure that the papers were pretty recent, and that way worked perfectly for me. The other method that I started off doing, and that was suggested in this bibliographic training session, but it was just a bit of a nightmare, this method. They suggested to go to not a search engine, like databases with loads of papers, I don't know, like PubMed or Web of Science. We were told to go to those and do like advanced searches that are using Boolean logic, which is where you look at your title and you extract all of the keywords. So you say cancer or tumour, or so you get all the synonyms and you want to search for papers that contain those words, and then use like and or not to refine your search and find papers that have not only the word cancer but also another keyword that's in your title as well. I don't know if you followed that explanation, but it's basically Boolean logic, and you're trying to find all of the papers that contain anything relevant to your title. You're supposed to then repeat that and do your search in loads of different ways to get as many papers as possible, and ultimately, as you can tell, you end up with a lot of papers. I ended up with thousands of papers, and I was like, so now what? You can obviously filter it by date, by author, what type of article you want, how many citations it's had. Be warned with that though, if it's had a lot of citations, it can indicate that the paper is of high quality, yes, but an older paper will obviously accumulate more citations over time, so just bear that in mind. Yeah, so I had these thousands of papers and I went to my supervisor like, look, what do I do with these now? And he was like, that's not really the most efficient way to find good papers. So that's why I turned to going to reviews first and then finding primary literature from the reviews. Sort this out. And then obviously I started to read them and make my notes. So that's what we're going to move on to now, is note making. In a nutshell, I just basically got myself up a Word document, one big document to start with, and I'd put the title of the paper I was reading and then I'd make my notes afterwards. And I did that for all of my papers. The goal essentially is to try and make your notes as comprehensive but concise as possible, with the view to not having to go back to that original paper. Like, your notes should be sufficient for you to understand what was going on in that paper without you having to go back to the review or the article you read originally, and also write it in your own words. I cannot stress this enough. If you write your notes in your own words instead of just copying and pasting it, which is sometimes the quickest option, just to, you know, just copy and paste that paragraph and dump it in your notes. But the problem with that is obviously plagiarism. But if you have your notes and it's a mixture of your own writing and some bits that are copied and pasted, you might know what's copied and pasted and what's not, but it's a bit ambiguous, and you'll probably end up having to write everything again in your own words when some of it you already did. So if you be consistent and make sure everything is written in your own words, then when you're writing it, you can just copy and paste what you've already written and put that in your dissertation, if you see what I mean. Write it in your own words, make sure you are understanding things as you go along, and it will just save so much time when you write it, because you can just copy and paste what you've written because it is already your work and not somebody else's. My last video in this series was about note making anyway, so you can watch that. So the reviews, as I said, they're quite general, they give you a nice overview, and that's why I love them. However, when I read primary research papers, I try and look for certain key things. So what were their aims? And then secondly, I note down the experimental methods that they used. I then note down the results, the conclusions, and then the fifth thing, so I try and pull 5 things from a primary paper, is your opinion basically. What do you think of this article? How good is it? Did they have a large enough sample size? It's your opinion. Where else should the research go further? What questions did they not answer and should be done in the future? That's one of the most important things for you to write about in your dissertation, because it will really step up your grade. Even if it's not correct, but you can be critical and analytical of these papers because you're at university, you're at a high enough level now to do that. That's note making. And then the next thing is obviously planning the structure of your dissertation. What's it gonna look like? So there were certain sections that we had to include that were kind of compulsory for our dissertations, which were a summary or an abstract. You had to have an introduction which kind of set the context and the scene, and then you had to have a conclusion. And I'm gonna say now for the conclusion, what I think is really important is for you to draw your own conclusion, not what you've read in somebody else's review or somebody else's paper. Your thoughts. What do you think is going on? You're the one that's done all this research and have written this dissertation, so you should be the one that is drawing your own conclusion. Originally, I wrote my conclusion that was really plain and boring and that just basically didn't have any substance to it and wasn't anything novel, whereas when I thought about it and was like, actually, what do I think is going on here? I basically formulated my own model because this is what I thought was going on, having done all this research. So I even drew my own diagram that summarized my model, so put it in a picture form. But yeah, so those were our compulsory sections, but in terms of the sections that I made myself, and this was suggested by my supervisor, and then since I've used this to write essays because I think it's an incredible method to use. It's not really a method, but it's just a strategy, I don't know. Instead of just using plain and boring subheadings that were just phrases or words, I formulated specific questions. So I had my big question or title of my dissertation, and then all of my subheadings in different sections were more specific questions. And the reason why I think this works really well is because it helps you yourself in that section when you're writing it answer the question. It also is really great because it shows the reader that you're being insightful. You're like probing the question to try and get the answers. When I wrote it, as I said, because I put so much effort into doing my research, writing my notes all in my own words, and already kind of formulating my own ideas and conclusions, writing it wasn't actually too bad. Also, I had a bit of a nightmare because my dissertation, as I said, was only supposed to be 6,000 words. However, I ended up with my first draft that was 16,000 words. So yeah, like more than double what it should have been. Don't be afraid to write over the word limit at the start. Maybe don't go too over the top, but if you do write more, it's fine because you will end up condensing it. You have to, basically. Oh my gosh, I've actually missed out something that's super important that I did. Okay, sorry, rewind a little bit. Before I did my writing phase, with my notes in that one massive document, I went through and color coded those notes according to the section or the subheading or the mini question that they would go into. And so it was not like one paper would go into one whole section of your dissertation. There might have been some parts of one paper that would fit in one and another that would go in another, sort of thing. It took quite a while, as you can see, but it was so worth it because once I had this all color coded according to the sections it would go into, I then made lots of separate Word documents that were relevant for each section of my dissertation, and then I could write each section in turn, sort of thing. And that's basically it. Once you've written it, you've written it. I'm just now going to give you some advice for writing it. In terms of condensing it, obviously I did have to take out whole sections at first because I did just go into too much detail. As I said before, I did narrow down my title and modified it slightly because there was no way I was going to cover everything that was originally in this title in 6,000 words. You want your research area to be really focused and quite specific anyway. And then obviously what is so powerful and often underestimated is the power of removing waffle. So I'm someone who does waffle, I've said this before. Remove all of the redundant words and the waffle that you don't need, because if you do this, you manage to cut down your words significantly. It would be so much easier for the reader to read your dissertation if it was more concise, to the point, and had shorter sentences. Shorter sentences do work a lot better than longer ones, and even though I read my dissertation and thought originally that it sounded too blunt because I changed it so the sentences were a bit shorter, it is so much clearer to read and understand, especially if it's quite a complex topic. You want the person who's reading it to understand your points. From about 10,000 down to 6,000 words, I think, I managed to get rid of 4,000 just by removing waffle. But yeah, my supervisor was like, do not remove your sections because it's all worthy content. What you need to do instead is remove the waffle, and that's what I'm telling you guys to do. Remove the fluffiness and the waffle that you do not need. I don't know how many times I said waffle, but maybe I'm waffling now. Probably am. Obviously this is very important if you are referencing, which I assume you probably would be in a dissertation. Reference correctly. I didn't do it by hand. I used EndNote, which was so annoying at first. Don't ask me how I got it to work. I really don't know. It stressed me out so much and it took quite a while to actually sort out. But I did use a software that meant whenever I added a reference, it was automatically building a bibliography for me. I found that really useful. And if you can get these softwares to work like EndNote, which I put a plugin on Word, or Mendeley or Zetero, something like that. It will save you a lot of time as opposed to doing it by hand. I included a table of contents obviously, but also a list of abbreviations. Whenever I'd write something and then I abbreviated it, obviously I wrote it out in full the first time and then put it in brackets next to it. I then put all of those abbreviations in a table just in case the reader wanted to refer to that, and I also had a list of tables and a list of figures. Make your own tables, make your own diagrams. I made pretty much all of my diagrams. I drew them by hand originally, which I thought looked really pretty, I'm not gonna lie, but I then did them on PowerPoint on the computer and they just looked really professional and I was really proud of them. I think doing your own diagrams also shows that you're putting extra time into making those diagrams. You can make them as detailed as you want. So yeah, it gives you this originality. Oh yeah, and what I've been trying to stress kind of throughout this video is you bringing your ideas, your opinions, your thoughts. I made a table that was kind of near the end of my dissertation that had a list of questions that were outstanding. You don't want it to just be the same as any other review that's already out there. And that is what I really tried to focus on. Kind of related to that, I would say don't be afraid to say I. A lot of science papers more recently are coming out being written in first person, and yeah, don't be afraid to do that because it makes it apparent to the reader that it is your opinion and not somebody else's. We'll finish on just some logistical things. I would say, as I said before, start early. We had the whole year to do it, but I wanted to get on top of it, and I'd also say set yourself your own deadlines. By the end of my first term, so from October to December, I wanted to have my first draft done, and I did achieve that because I told myself I wanted to do that. And then what I did after I'd got my first draft, I obviously started to try and condense it, and when I had a condensed version that was around the 6,000 word mark, I then left it for pretty much the whole of my second term and came back to it in the holidays after my second term to finalize everything. When it comes to proofreading it, I reread mine a lot. I read it on the computer, and then, as I showed you at the start, I did print it out and annotate things. What really helped me, and this was suggested by a friend, read it backwards. Don't read every sentence backwards, just read the last sentence and then the one before that, if you get what I mean. Every sentence still makes sense to you, but it means that you won't be anticipating what you want to say next. Get other people to read it, and get someone who doesn't really know a lot about that field to read it. I did get my sister to read it, and even though she knew nothing about the topic, what she could tell me was whether it made sense, whether it had any grammatical errors, etc. And yeah, I think that is basically everything in one video. I don't know how long this is gonna be, but I wanted it to be comprehensive, as I said, and tell you every little bit of detail. Please like it if you found it useful, you think you might find it useful. If you have any further questions or anything I didn't mention, please do comment down below because I do read comments and I will try and reply if I can do. And yeah, if you want to stick around, you like what I put on my channel, you can subscribe if you want to. I don't think there's anything else for me to say other than to sit here and keep waffling. Good luck if you're writing your dissertation. Look out for more of this series. I'll see you in another video basically. Bye for now, my friends. Bye.